The title of this video is Lying to You, on purpose, because the real story is so much darker than a simple answer would allow, and the only way to get there is to first tear down the assumption the question is built on. So here's the receipt, up front, before anything else. The Republic tried to destroy the Sith. More than once. The very first time they got the chance, they didn't negotiate, didn't contain, didn't philosophize about the nature of the dark side. They burned the temples, hunted the survivors, and bombarded entire worlds. The Galactic Republic launched what Legends continuity calls the Sith Holocaust, a systematic, state-authorized extermination campaign, and they did it with Jedi leading the strike teams. It didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is exactly why, 1,000 years later, Darth Sidious could dissolve the Republic in an afternoon with a single executive order and a perfectly legal command to clone troopers. These events are connected, not loosely, not metaphorically. They are directly, causally connected by a chain of decisions that begins with the Supreme Chancellor's overconfidence in 5000 BBY and ends with Jedi Masters dying on battlefields they never saw coming in 19 BBY. That's the story. Not that the Republic chose mercy, not that the Jedi were too idealistic to finish the job. The story is that the Republic believed they had finished the job, completely, permanently, beyond all doubt, and in that moment of absolute certainty, they built the political and military vacuum that made Order 66 not just possible, but structurally inevitable. 5000 BBY. Two Republic hyperspace scouts, Gav and Jory Darrigan, take a wrong turn through a newly mapped route and land on Korriban, deep inside the Stygian caldera, home of the ancient Sith Empire. What follows is the Great Hyperspace War. The Sith Dark Lord Naga Sadow uses their arrival as his pretext for invasion, amplifies his forces with force illusions, and for a brief, terrifying stretch, Sith armies are fighting on Coruscant itself. Then, Sadow's own apprentice, Gav Darrigan, betrays him. The illusions collapse. Republic and Jedi forces regroup, push the Sith back to Korriban, and destroy their fleet in what becomes the Second Battle of Korriban. Sadow flees to Yavin 4. The Sith Empire is shattered. The threat is over. The war is won. And this is the moment, this exact moment, when Supreme Chancellor Palpatine decides that victory isn't enough. He authorizes a full counter-invasion of the Sith worlds. Republic battleships and bombers descend on Korriban, Ziost, and every Sith colonial holding in the Stygian caldera. Ground troops follow, tasked with capturing or killing anyone they find. Jedi Shadows lead operations into ancient tombs, vaults, and libraries, destroying Sith holocrons, scrolls, and relics, systematically dismantling the knowledge infrastructure of an entire civilization. The Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban is bombarded. The great Sith library temple of Vishas Tuan on Arcania is wiped out completely. The sources describe billions dying across the Sith worlds, many of them civilians. One in-universe account records the justification directly. The Sith no longer posed a threat to the Republic, but Chancellor Palpatine was unsatisfied. He wanted to ensure no remnants remained, that the Sith could never rise again. So a cleanup operation became an extermination campaign. This is worth sitting with for a moment before moving on. The Republic's first instinct, given the opportunity, wasn't containment, it was elimination. And they pursued it with organized military force, with Jedi participation, with deliberate targeting of cultural sites and knowledge repositories alongside military ones. Later Jedi, centuries afterward, would look back on the Holocaust and call it a mistake. Not because it was too brutal, but because it failed. And the reason it failed is the first structural lesson of this entire story. One Sith Lord named Vitiate saw what was coming. He gathered surviving Sith, performed a ritual on his homeworld of Nathema that granted him near immortality, consuming the life force of the entire planet in the process, and then assembled an exile fleet. He used the Republic's own massacre as propaganda, pointing to the Holocaust as proof that the Jedi and Republic would always try to destroy them completely. That lie became the founding myth of his rebuilt empire. Over approximately 20 years, Vitiate's fleet traveled deep into the unknown regions and established a new Sith empire on the hidden world of Dromund Kaas. Roughly 1,300 years passed before anyone in the Republic would hear from them again. The Holocaust failed not because the Republic showed mercy. It failed because they couldn't purge what they couldn't find. This is an intelligence failure, not a philosophical failure. And that distinction matters because it means the Republic's approach was sound by their own logic. They just didn't know what they'd missed. When the Sith came back, they came back with everything. In Legends continuity, 3681 BBY marks the beginning of the Great Galactic War. The Sith Empire, now built on Dromund Kaas under Vitiate's descendants, launched a surprise invasion that caught the Republic completely unprepared. The war lasted 28 years, not months, not one campaign season, 28 years, during which the Republic's economy collapsed under the combined pressure of military expenditure and territorial losses. The Senate's leadership was decimated, and roughly half the known galaxy fell under Sith control. Then came the masterstroke. While Republic negotiators traveled to Alderaan to begin peace talks, Sith forces simultaneously executed a military operation against Coruscant itself. They occupied the capital. The Republic's political seat was held hostage. The negotiators on Alderaan had no leverage at all. The Treaty of Coruscant was signed in 3653 BBY, and the Republic didn't sign it because they wanted to. They signed it because the alternative was worse. The Republic was forced to cede 7 star systems to the Sith Empire and revoke Senate membership for a number of outlying worlds. Coruscant itself was only returned as part of the settlement. What followed was 12 years of Cold War, intense galactic tension, proxy conflicts, covert operations on both sides, while both governments technically maintained peace. Here's what's important about this period. Containment in this era wasn't a choice. The Republic wasn't philosophically committed to coexistence with the Sith. Their economy was shattered. Their leadership was dead. Their capital had been sacked. Jedi Master Darnala, General Ellen Garza of the Republic military, and the Royal House of Alderaan all opposed the treaty's terms. They weren't opposed to fighting. They just knew the math. The Republic didn't have the military capacity to defeat the Sith Empire outright. The Cold War was what you get when you want to eliminate your enemy and can't yet. Eventually, the Galactic War collapsed back into open conflict. The SWTOR-era Sith Empire dissolved across subsequent centuries, and new Sith factions emerged in the void. This becomes the New Sith Wars, approximately 2000 to 1000 BBY, a millennium of near-continuous conflict that ground down the Republic's military, destabilized its institutions, and periodically brought it to the brink of total collapse. Around 1100 BBY, the Republic was all but completely crushed, with Coruscant itself at Sith mercy. And then, as had happened before, the Sith imploded. Their lords fought each other over who would become dominant. The Republic survived not through victory, but through Sith self-destruction. Out of those ashes, around 1010 BBY, a Sith Lord named Skir Khan consolidated the surviving Sith Lords into a single organization, the Brotherhood of Darkness. Khan abolished the formal title of Dark Lord of the Sith, declared all members equal lords, and rallied them for one final coordinated push against the Republic's Jedi defenders, who had organized as the Army of Light. This reorganization was, as we'll see, one of the most fatally misguided decisions in Sith history, and not for the obvious reason. The Army of Light was commanded by a Jedi Master named Lord Hoth, a human male who had been fighting Sith across this campaign longer than most of his soldiers had been alive. Over 2 years, most commonly dated 1002 to 1000 BBY in Legends continuity, though some lore sources place the broader campaign's end at 1032 BBY. The Brotherhood and the Army of Light fought 7 battles on a single world, Ruusan. Ruusan was nothing before these wars. Rocky terrain, scattered populations, unremarkable. After 7 battles, it was a graveyard that bent the Force itself around the weight of everything that died there. By the 7th battle, the Sith were near defeat. 6 prior engagements had bled the Brotherhood down. Khan's forces had retreated into the caves and underground passages of Ruusan, cornered, running out of options. The Republic and Jedi were winning. The war, finally, after 1,000 years of nearly continuous conflict, appeared to be ending. But among the Brotherhood was one Sith Lord who had been working against them the entire time. Darth Bane had no intention of winning the war as part of the Brotherhood. He'd spent months undermining Khan's authority, spreading dissent, weakening the Brotherhood's cohesion from inside. His core diagnosis, the Brotherhood model, was fundamentally broken. 30 Sith Lords sharing power meant 30 nodes of conflict, 30 competing ambitions, 30 fracture points. The Brotherhood had grown weak from infighting. Power divided was power diminished. Bane's plan required the Brotherhood to die, all of them. During the campaign, Bane had retrieved a holocron from the ancient Sith temple on Lihan, the world sometimes called Rakata Prime. It had belonged to Darth Revan and contained instructions for a weapon of almost unimaginable destructive potential, a thought bomb. The weapon required multiple Sith Lords working in unified concentration, channeling their combined force energy into a single focused detonation. When released, it annihilated every force-sensitive being within its blast radius, not just killing them, but consuming them entirely, shredding both the physical and the non-physical, pulling fragmented souls into a swirling vortex of perpetual torment. A silver, iridescent orb. Every Jedi, every Sith, every force-sensitive creature caught within range. Gone. The spirits trapped inside never moved on. They just screamed. Bane passed the thought bomb's instructions to Khan, deliberately. He also convinced Khan, and this is the part that makes this a story about tragedy as much as conspiracy, that the Brotherhood could survive its detonation if they executed it correctly. Khan planned to draw the Jedi into the caves, lure them close, and then unleash the weapon, expecting to emerge victorious on the other side. He never understood that Bane had no intention of being there when it went off. Lord Hoth knew something was wrong. He ordered Lord Valenthyne Farfalla, his co-commander, to retreat with the majority of the Army of Light. Farfalla pulled back with the bulk of the Jedi forces. Then Hoth selected exactly 100 Jedi volunteers and led them personally into the caves on Ruusan, pursuing Khan and the Brotherhood into the underground tunnels. He knew what he was going into. He went anyway. When the thought bomb detonated, it instantaneously destroyed Skir Khan, the entire Brotherhood of Darkness, and all 100 Jedi who had followed Lord Hoth into the caves. Their souls were consumed. For over 1,000 years afterward, the spirits of Hoth, Khan, and all the rest would remain trapped inside the thought bomb's resonance, at what became known as the Valley of the Jedi, unable to move on, unable to rest, suspended in that moment of destruction, until Kyle Katarn finally freed them in 5 ABY. A Jedi named Johun Othone built a monument to the fallen at that site, which became a powerful Force nexus. Darth Bane wasn't in the cave. He had left the battlefield before Khan triggered the weapon. He walked through the aftermath of Ruusan alone, and on his way out, he encountered a young girl named Xana. She became his apprentice before the smoke had cleared. The Army of Light had won. The Brotherhood of Darkness was destroyed, their leadership obliterated alongside 100 of the most committed Jedi fighters of the era. Farfalla survived, commanding the surviving Jedi forces. The Republic's military was still intact. The new Sith Wars, 1,000 years of conflict, were over. And Lord Valenthyne Farfalla, the Jedi commander who had just won the defining battle of that war, completely dismissed every rumor that any Sith had survived Ruusan. Not cautiously, not with expressed uncertainty. He dismissed them. This is documented specifically, and it matters enormously, because Farfalla wasn't a minor figure who faded into obscurity. He went on to help a politician named Tarsis Valorum, not the Finis Valorum of the prequel films, but his ancestor, separated by roughly 1,000 years, rise to the position of Supreme Chancellor. And together, Farfalla and Tarsis Valorum enacted the Ruusan Reformations. The man who won the Battle of Ruusan, who personally dismissed the possibility of Sith survival, helped write the legislation that dismantled the Republic's capacity to defend itself. That's not irony in a soft sense. That's the mechanism of catastrophe. The Ruusan Reformations, this is entirely Legends continuity to be clear, weren't symbolic. They weren't a cultural shift or a vague reorientation of priorities. They were specific, binding, legislative restructuring of the Galactic Republic's institutions, passed in the aftermath of the new Sith Wars in 1000 BBY under Chancellor Tarsus Valorum. Here's what the Reformation actually required. The Jedi Order was formally absorbed into the Republic's judicial department. They were placed under the supervision of the Supreme Chancellor. They were legally prohibited from holding military ranks. Titles like Jedi Lord, which Hoth had held, were abolished. They had to abandon battle armor. They disbanded their army, their naval forces, and their starfighter wings. The Jedi went from an independent military organization with its own command authority, capable of fielding and directing armies across the galaxy, to an arm of the Republic's civil security apparatus, advisors, peacekeepers, police, subservient to civilian Senate oversight in a way that wasn't a gentleman's agreement, but a statutory requirement. For the Republic itself, the military was dissolved and replaced by the judicial forces, a peacekeeping body entirely unsuited to warfighting. The millions of pre-existing administrative sectors were reorganized into exactly 1,024 sectors, each with individual senatorial representation. This consolidated the entire political architecture of the Republic into a fixed, manageable Senate structure. The Republic wouldn't have a standing military again for 978 years, until the Clone Wars. Every one of these provisions made complete sense if you believed the Sith were dead. The new Sith Wars had been catastrophically expensive. The Republic's military apparatus had been operating at war footing for a millennium. The galaxy needed economic recovery, institutional stability, reduced expenditure. You've just won the final war. Of course you demobilize. Of course you reform the political structures that had become distorted by 1,000 years of emergency. The Ruusan Reformation was rational, prudent governance, calibrated entirely to a world in which the Sith no longer existed. Those premises were wrong. And while the Republic was enacting them, Darth Bane was establishing the rule of two. Bane's core insight was simple and devastating. Every time the Sith had risen in force, the Republic and the Jedi had destroyed them. Not because the Republic was inherently more powerful. The new Sith Wars had taken the Republic to the brink of extinction more than once. The Sith lost because they couldn't stop consuming each other. Many Sith competing for dominance meant fragmented power, constant internal betrayal, and eventually, collapse. The Brotherhood of Darkness had just proven this definitively by producing a single member who engineered their entire destruction from the inside. The solution? Only 2 Sith at any time. 1 master to embody power, 1 apprentice to crave it. No brotherhood, no council, no competing factions. Just 2. The master trains the apprentice to be powerful enough to eventually kill them, which is how succession happens. Every generation, the stronger survives. Every generation, the accumulated knowledge and dark side power passes forward, compounding. Bane and Xana operated in secret, hiding from a republic that believed they were extinct, accumulating wealth, knowledge, and political access across decades. Through Xana's specific manipulations, documented in the events covered by Drew Karpyshyn's Darth Bane trilogy, the Jedi remained unaware that Bane had survived. Xana made certain of it. The fiction of Sith extinction wasn't just lucky circumstance, it was actively maintained. Simultaneously, the Jedi were rebuilding their order around the premise that active combat against a Sith threat was a relic of history. The contrast between these two trajectories is the engine of everything that follows. Bane is establishing a long-term accumulation strategy, specifically designed to survive in secret for as long as necessary. The Republic is legally dismantling the institutional structures that would allow anyone to respond when the Sith eventually re-emerged. These events are contemporaneous. They are happening in the same year, and neither side knew about the other's decisions, which is exactly what made the combination lethal. 1,000 years of peace has a way of rewriting an institution. Before Ruusan, the Jedi Order had been heavily militarized for millennia. Jedi held ranks like Jedi Lord and commanded autonomous military forces directly. They'd sustained a 7-battle campaign across 2 years, deploying enough warriors to lose 100 in a single cave and still have Farfalla's surviving force intact. They were warrior monks, full stop, with the institutional culture and combat training that implied. After Ruusan, generation by generation, that changed. Without a Sith threat, there was nothing to sharpen against. The Jedi still trained in lightsaber combat and force technique, but the context was different. You weren't training to fight Sith Lords, because Sith Lords didn't exist. You were training for peacekeeping missions, dispute mediation, targeted operations against crime syndicates and regional warlords. The mandate had changed, and over 1,000 years, the identity followed the mandate. By the time of the Phantom Menace, the Jedi Council's institutional memory of actual Sith warfare was 1,000 years old. When Qui-Gon Jinn returned from Tatooine, reporting that a Sith Lord had attacked him, the Council's response was institutional skepticism. Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi stated flatly that the Sith had been extinct for a millennium. The Council acknowledged Qui-Gon had encountered a skilled dark side practitioner, but a Sith Lord? The Jedi Order had been built on the assumption that was impossible. Their training, their structure, their entire sense of what threats existed in the galaxy, all of it calibrated to a world where the Sith were history. Later in the prequel era, Mace Windu acknowledged directly that the Jedi's ability to use the Force had diminished. Yoda understood that their perception had been clouded. They weren't wrong. They just attributed it to the dark side's influence, without grasping that the source of that influence was someone who had been working against them from inside the Senate chamber for years. The Jedi couldn't see it, partly because the dark side was screening them, and partly because their institutional framework told them there was nothing to see. This wasn't weakness, exactly. It was institutional deformation, the predictable result of an organization shaped by 1,000 years of legally mandated peacekeeping, stripped of military capacity and command authority, placed under civilian oversight, and trained against a threat that its own historical record said had been permanently neutralized. Calling the prequel Jedi naive is like calling a soldier trained for urban peacekeeping naive because they weren't prepared for conventional warfare. They were trained for the world they'd been told existed. The world that actually existed was very different. Sheev Palpatine, Darth Sidious, was approximately the 13th or 14th Sith Lord in Bane's Rule of Two lineage, depending on how you count. He had spent decades embedding himself in the Senate, accumulating political trust, building the reputation of a moderate, reasonable Naboo senator who rose through legitimate channels to the position of Supreme Chancellor. He didn't take the galaxy by force. He manipulated it into giving him absolute power. The post-Ruusan Senate structure made this possible in a specific, mechanical way. Tarsis Valorum's 1,024-sector reorganization had created a fixed Senate architecture, large enough to appear democratic, but concentrated enough to be systematically worked. Emergency powers provisions, built into a system that had been governing a demilitarized, largely peaceful galaxy for 1,000 years, existed for genuine crises, and could be legally extended with Senate approval. Palpatine understood exactly which levers to pull. When the Separatist crisis emerged, the Republic had no military to deploy. 978 years of demilitarization will do that. The Clone Army, secretly commissioned years earlier, its origins deliberately obscured, arrived as a ready-made solution to an existential emergency. The Senate accepted it essentially without alternative. The Jedi were legally bound under the Ruusan Reformation to serve under Senate authority, which meant that when the Republic was at war and the Senate supported the war, the Jedi were its generals. Legally, structurally. Not by choice, but by the statutory framework that had defined their role for a millennium. And inside every clone trooper, embedded before the Clone Wars even began, was a behavioral conditioning protocol. Order 66 in Legends continuity, implemented through genetic programming, and in canon continuity through inhibitor chips implanted in the clones' brains, that would, on command, cause them to turn on and execute any Jedi officer they served under. The Jedi generals would be giving orders one moment and dying the next, killed by the soldiers they'd fought alongside for 3 years, in locations scattered across the entire galaxy simultaneously, with no warning and no coordination possible. The mechanism by which this was possible, generals surrounded by troops rather than leading independent forces, Jedi legally integrated into a military command structure they had no authority to refuse, was a direct product of the Ruusan Reformation. The Jedi couldn't maintain independent forces. They couldn't command their own armies. They served under the Senate's military authority. That's what the Reformation required. Palpatine didn't break the system to embed Order 66 in a position where it would work. He used the system exactly as designed. The 1,024-sector Senate gave him a democracy he could hollow out from the inside. The demilitarized Republic gave him a government that needed a military and couldn't say no when one appeared. The legally subservient Jedi Order gave him generals who couldn't refuse their deployment orders and couldn't survive them. Every one of those structural vulnerabilities existed because of what the Republic built in 1000 BBY, because Farfalla dismissed the rumors, because Tarsus Valorum reorganized the sectors, because the legislation said no standing army, no independent Jedi command, no military ranks, report to the Judicial Department, because 978 years without a Sith threat taught the Republic that those constraints weren't constraints at all. They were just the normal shape of peacetime governance. Here's the thing the title gets wrong, and gets right by getting it wrong. The Republic didn't fail to try to destroy the Sith. They tried in 5000 BBY and came within reach of succeeding, failing only because one Sith Lord escaped to the unknown regions with a fleet the Republic didn't know existed. They tried through the Cold War period, grinding through 28 years of open conflict and a forced peace treaty, losing their economy and their capital city, and still refusing to permanently concede. They tried for 1,000 years in the new Sith Wars, fighting battle after battle, sustaining devastation that would have ended any lesser civilization. And at the 7th Battle of Ruusan, they won. Every surviving Sith Lord in the known galaxy died in that cave, destroyed by a weapon designed to kill them all. Lord Hoth and 100 Jedi died with them, and Hoth knew they would when he walked in. That's how seriously the Republic took this. That's how much it cost. The tragedy of Ruusan isn't that the Republic didn't try hard enough. The tragedy is that they tried so hard, paid so much, and believed so completely in the victory they'd earned that they couldn't conceive of what they'd missed. One man survived by not being in the cave. He left the battlefield and immediately began building the structure that would outlast every institution the Republic spent the next 1,000 years constructing. Darth Bane called it the Rule of Two. He might as well have called it the Rule of One Mistake. The Ruusan Reformation is celebrated in the Legends timeline as the dawn of 1,000 years of peace, the rational restructuring of a galaxy exhausted by endless war. And it was all of those things. It was also, with perfect structural symmetry, the moment the Republic handed the Sith the weapon that would destroy them. Not a blaster, not a fleet, a legislative package. 1,024 sectors, a dissolved military, a legally subservient Jedi Order, and the absolute certainty that the enemy was dead. Palpatine didn't defeat the Republic. He waited for the Republic to finish defeating itself, and then he sent the bill. Order 66 wasn't a surprise attack. It was a debt collecting, on a 1,000-year-old mistake, made on the day a Jedi Lord named Farfalla looked at the wreckage of Ruusan and decided there was nothing left to worry about. Subscribe for more stories like this.